Greetings, jelly spoons, and welcome to this episode of Monday Madness, the Monday show where I talk about anything and everything. And this week, I'm back on my favourite topic of all, Peter Pan and the story of Peter Pan in the world of the Neverland. You can find more about this on my TikTok channel, which is Peter Pan Lore / Peter Pan Facts, or you can find any of my more long-form videos right here on this YouTube channel under the playlist entitled Neverland Watch. Alright, let's get on with the video. So for this month, once again, I got my Instagram followers and my Patreons to vote, and they decided the theme of the month. And it was a close run thing, and it came down to just a couple of votes, but in the end, you guys have picked Destiny to be the theme of the month. So I decided to use my Peter Pan lore and knowledge and look through the story of Peter Pan and the world of the Neverland to bring you a video with the theme of Destiny in relation to that story. I'm going to title this video something along the lines of The Threads of Destiny, and I'm going to pick out some of the butterfly effect moments from the story of Peter Pan and talk about the ripple effect that they had on the rest of the adventure. So it's a little bit like the game Until Dawn, only slightly less terrifying. When I'm talking about the moments of destiny and the ripple effects that they have, I am going to try to do them in chronological order. So I'll start at the beginning of the story and I'll work my way through. However, when I talk about each moment, I will then discuss everything that affects later down the road. So spoilers, I guess, for the story that's been out for over 100 years and that I've talked about many times on this channel. And also, I will jump around a little bit narratively when I talk about the effects that one thing has on something else, and then I'll go back to the next moment which had more ripple effects further on down the road. Alright, let's do it then. What is the first butterfly effect, moment of destiny? What's the first ripple within the story? Also, a small moment of clarification before we begin. So there are many different moments within any story that you could choose and label them as butterfly effects, probably correctly. Some of them are up to interpretation as well, of course. So within this video, talking about these moments, I am specifically talking about character choices and decisions. A moment of either chosen action or chosen inaction. I'm not talking about a scenario that happened to happen to them. I'm talking about a definite decision that they did or did not make. That's what I'm using as my criteria for creating the butterfly effect and being a moment of chosen destiny, as it were. The first moment of destiny, which if you are watching the play has already happened, and if you're reading the novel you learn about in the first couple of chapters, is Mrs. Darling's interaction with Peter's shadow. Specifically, Mrs. Darling's decision to take the shadow down from where it's hanging outside the nursery window. Originally, Mrs. Darling and Nana left it hanging there hoping Peter would return for it and not disturb the children. However, Mrs. Darling at the beginning of the story, much like her husband, is so concerned about the opinions of their neighbours and she wants to be respected and uphold their position in society, that when she realises that the shadow dangling there looks a bit like the washing and lowers the tone of the whole house, she then makes the decision to bring the shadow inside, rolls it up carefully and puts it in a drawer. And it is this decision which means that Peter Pan doesn't just return to the Darlings' nursery window, collect his shadow and leave, but he actually comes inside the nursery to hunt for his shadow and then wakes Wendy Darling and the whole adventure begins. The second ripple effect, moment of destiny, butterfly effect, I'm going to keep using those interchangeably throughout this entire video. The second one moves from Mrs. Darling straight onto her husband, Mr. Darling. Now, Mr. Darling makes a decision in the very early stages of the story which set up quite a lot of things. In fact, I'm looking at my notes right now and it sets up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So what is it that Mr. Darling does? Well, it's actually something he doesn't do. Mr. Darling decides not to take his medicine. Now, at the beginning of the story, Michael Darling, the youngest child, is fighting over taking his medicine. He doesn't want to, but father keeps saying to his son, I took medicine without a murmur when I was your age. I would thank my parents for giving me medicine. You should do it too. Now, actually, this isn't true, but he very much believes it of himself. He's a very proud man. He believes it is true, even though it's not. So he wants his son Michael to take his medicine like a man. That in itself is a very bad attitude, which did rub off on his other son John, but we'll talk about that in another video. But now comes the moment of destiny. Mr. Darling has bragged to his children that he would always take medicine without a murmur, and he says that the medicine he has to take now as an adult is much nastier than Michael's medicine. He then goes on to say, proudly of himself, that he would take it now as an example to his son, but of course he's lost the bottle. We also learn that this is not true. Mr. Darling had misplaced the bottle. However, Liza, their maid, had found it, and Wendy Darling knew exactly where it was. So Wendy, thinking she was being helpful, went to fetch the medicine bottle, and Mr. Darling now knew that he was in trouble. He was going to have to take this medicine and prove that he was a brave man to make his son take his medicine too. Eventually it was decided that Michael and Mr. Darling would take their medicine off their spoons at the same time. They counted down 1, 2, 3, and then Michael took his medicine and Mr. Darling threw his behind his back, claiming that he missed it. but all his children were in uproar at this point, which leads to the next piece of ripple effect. Mr. Darling then felt in response to this that his children did not admire him, and this is a stance that he has had at many points during the story, and this is something that truly deeply affects him. And instead of apologizing for his decision and making amends with his children, he doubles down, causing the next ripple effect. Mr. Darling attempts to wrangle his children's affection back by distracting them with humour. He pours some of his medicine into Nana's bowl, where it looks a bit like milk, and he feeds it to Nana. Nana, licking it up, realises what it is, and the children rush to comfort Nana, and even Mrs. Darling says, "Oh, George, it's your medicine." So as the children sit there cuddling Nana, and Mrs. Darling is looking askance at her husband, Mr. Darling, standing there alone and embarrassed, with pride burning in his chest, makes yet another ripple effect decision. He turns his anger and frustration and embarrassment onto Nana the dog, who at this point had unfortunately already brushed past his trousers and left dog hair on them. He was already frustrated with her, and now seeing his family care more about her than about him, he takes her outside, out of the nursery, and chains her up in the yard. And so he and his wife leave Nana chained up in the yard and go out to their party, meaning that the biggest ripple effect of all can now happen. With Nana chained up in the yard, there is nobody upstairs in the nursery to watch over the children. And when Peter arrives, Wendy wakes up and he offers to take them to the Neverland. There is no one there to stop them. The third moment of destiny comes when Wendy Darling offers Peter Pan a kiss, or a thimble. Now, most of us will recognise this point in the story. Wendy offers Peter a kiss, Peter has no idea what a kiss is, and so Wendy, not wishing to embarrass the boy, offers him her thimble. And in response, Peter gives her an acorn button. And this decision, this moment of destiny, has ripple effects that actually have life or death consequences just a little ways down the road. So we learn very quickly in the story that the fairy Tinkerbell does not like Wendy at all. And when they reach the Neverland and the children are separated by being fired at by Long Tom, the pirate's cannon, Wendy is left with Tinkerbell, who seizes her opportunity. She dives down and makes Wendy follow her to the Lost Boys, where she convinces them to shoot at the Wendy bird, and Tootles fires an arrow that flies up and it hits Wendy, and she falls to the ground, supposedly dead. However, when Peter arrives and they inspect Wendy's body more closely, they realise that Tootles' arrow has actually struck against the acorn button that Peter gave her as a kiss. The kiss itself has saved Wendy Darling's life. Number 4 is an interesting one because it has consequences both incredibly good and incredibly bad. So the fourth moment I'm talking about, the fourth butterfly effect, the fourth decision, the fourth moment of destiny, whatever you want to call it, this is Peter's decision to help rescue Tiger Lily from Maruna's Rock. So Tiger Lily has been taken to Maruna's Rock by the pirates Starkey and Smee, and she is being left on the rock tied up where she is going to drown. In the lore of J.M. Barrie's Neverland, he describes how this would be a particularly harrowing death for Tiger Lily. While she sits there refusing to act scared because she is a princess and she will die bravely, she actually knows that if she dies in water, she won't be able to reach the afterlife, and she won't be able to see any of her friends or her family ever again. So it's a particularly strong moment for her character that she behaves like a badass princess and sits there like, no, I'm not going to be scared. I'm not going to show any fear to you pirates. And yet she knows that this situation is going to cause her to be cut off from everyone that she loves for the rest of eternity. Luckily for Tiger Lily though, Peter and the Lost Boys and Wendy, John and Michael are close by, and Peter is angered by the fact that it's 2 against 1, 2 pirates versus Tiger Lily, and it's this unfairness which makes him act to save her. He imitates the voice of Captain Hook, instructs the pirates to set her free, and so they cut her bonds and Tiger Lily is able to swim away to freedom. And this decision has huge ramifications for the rest of the story. The first and very often most underrated one is that Tiger Lily is now freed from this terrible, terrible fate. It's not just her life that has been saved, but her afterlife as well. And while Peter very likely did not have any idea that that's what his action was doing, nonetheless, he has saved her from this terrible, terrible fate. And the importance and significance of that is what leads us to the next ripple effect, which is Tiger Lily and her people being so thankful to Peter that they come and guard the Lost Boys' hideout, protecting it from the pirates and any other foes who might come near. And I really wish that the ripple effects could stop there, but there's one more. And that is that when the pirates come to surround the home under the ground and kidnap all of the Lost Boys, of course, Tiger Lily and her people are there protecting them. And in doing so, they fall victim to Captain Hook's terrible, unfair ploy where he ambushes them completely against the rules of play on the Neverland and wipes out most of Tiger Lily's people. I wish I could say that number 5 had a slightly lighter note. It has a slightly happier ending. That's all I can promise. And it has a fun fact hidden in it about the Law of the Neverland. So here we go. This one it doesn't start very cheerful, but by the end I promise you it is. So number 5, the 5th butterfly effect moment, the 5th moment of destiny. Now this comes on Maroona's Rock, which is, as I've said many times before, my favourite part of the story of Peter Pan. And it actually comes right after moment number 4 that I just talked about. So after Peter has tricked the pirates into releasing Tiger Lily, the real Captain Hook shows up. And they end up all getting into a big fight. The Lost Boys and the pirates and Peter and Hook. And at one point, Peter and Captain Hook both scale Maroona's Rock to catch a breath. And as they're both climbing up the opposite sides, they realise the other is there as they lock eyes. Peter is about to grab a blade and ram it home, but he realises that he is now higher up the rock than Captain Hook, and that would not be fighting fair. So, depending on which version you are watching or reading, Peter either offers Captain Hook a hand, or he stands and he waits for the pirate captain to be higher up on the rock as well. And it is this decision by Peter which leads to the next series of ripple effects. The first one being that Captain Hook's response is to bite him twice with the iron claw. And this action then leaves Peter for dead on Maroona's Rock. At one point, Wendy Darling is left on the rock with Peter, and neither of them can swim or fly, but Michael's kite arrives and Peter ties it around Wendy so that she can fly off and be saved. So he is ultimately left on the rock by himself. We then get the next ripple effect moment, which is a line lots of people already know from this character, even if they have never read the story, and that is the line, "To die will be an awfully big adventure." I've talked about this moment in other videos before. I will talk about it many, many times in future videos, but essentially this is a huge insight into Peter's character, how his mind works, how his personality works, and you get to see once again that he forgets everything over time, everyone, everything, and he believes in this moment that he is facing his own demise for the first time. And he is in a dark lagoon with no one else there, completely alone, listening to the lapping water nibbling at his feet, which is about to drown him. And while it's a harrowing, terrifying moment, it is also beautiful. So because of Peter's choice to behave fairly to Captain Hook, he also very nearly dies himself. However, the upshot of this, which has another little ripple effect of goodness, is that the Neverbird comes to rescue Peter. And the final ripple effect of Peter's decision to be fair to Captain Hook is that the Neverbird gives him her nest, even though there's eggs in it, so that Peter can float on the lagoon to safety. Peter then puts the eggs into Starkey the Pirate's hat, which had been left on a stave on the rock, and he sets this hat adrift on the lagoon, and the Neverbird sits on it as her new nest. And the extra upshot of this, which is a cool piece of lore which I absolutely love, is that the Neverbird sat on this hat for the rest of her days, and it was her nest. And all the other Neverbirds started building their nests in the same shape. So now, on the Neverland, all the Neverbirds build their nests in the shape of Starkey the Pirate's tarpaulin hat. See, I told you it was sort of fun at the end. We go from Peter getting nearly maimed and murdered to, hat lore. Who knew? Number 6. This is a very pivotal moment. So much so that J.M. Barrie actually talks about it himself within the story as a moment of great decision and great consequence. And this 6th moment of destiny, of ripple effects and of butterfly effects comes in the chapter The Happy Home. The Lost Boys are all going to bed and they have asked Wendy to tell them a story. They want their favourite story, the story they love best, and the story that Peter hates the most. J.M. Barrie then says this: "Usually when she, Wendy, began to tell this story, he, Peter, left the room or put his hands over his ears, and possibly, if he had done either of those things this time, they might all still be on the island. But tonight, he remained on his stool, and we shall see what happened." Look at all my sticky notes just for this particular page. I have so many. Look at it. The first kind of obvious ripple effect from Peter choosing to remain on his stool is that he hears Wendy's story. And this leads to the next ripple effect. The story that Wendy tells is very clearly based on her and her brothers. She talks about how there was a gentleman and a lady and they had 3 children and they flew away to the Neverland and they met the Lost Boys and they had loads of adventures. They stayed away for moons and moons and then they flew back. They alighted at London Station and Wendy was an elegant lady and they flew up to the window into the arms of their parents, who had of course left the window open for them, and their loving mother embraced them, and oh, what a happy scene. And then Peter groans, outwardly, audibly, in front of everyone at the very end of this story. This of course gets everyone's attention and they ask Peter what's wrong, and Peter simply says, "You are wrong about mothers." Peter then goes on to tell them something he had hitherto kept a secret. He tells Wendy, John Michael, and all of his lost boys that at one point he went back to visit his mother, and the window was barred. She was no longer waiting for him. That he believed, just like them, that of course the window would be open for him, but it wasn't. His mother had forgotten about him, and there was another little boy asleep in his bed. Peter telling them this truth about mothers then has another ripple effect, which is that Wendy decides that she must go home. She takes her brothers with her, and all of the lost boys decide to go with them. And so, by Peter choosing to remain on his stool and listen to Wendy's story, he ends up losing everyone around him. Number 7, and this one is particularly special, because this is one of the moments, a bit like number 6, where J.M. Barrie, the author, directly addresses the fact that a decision a character makes has consequences on the rest of the story. This event comes in the chapter, Do You Believe in Fairies? And it involves Captain Hook and Wendy Darling. At this point in the story, Captain Hook has led an unfair attack against Tiger Lily and her people, wiped most of them out, and now the pirates stand at the mouths of the hollow trees into the home under the ground, waiting for the lost boys to emerge so they can kidnap them and take them all back to the pirate ship. J.M. Barrie describes how all the boys were plucked from their trees in a ruthless manner, and several of them were in the air at a time, like bales of goods flung from hand to hand. He then goes on to say, a different treatment was accorded to Wendy, who came last. With ironical politeness, Hook raised his hat to her, and, offering her his arm, escorted her to the spot where the others were being gagged. J.M. Barrie goes on to say at this point that Wendy Darling was too fascinated to even cry out. She was only, J.M. Barrie describes, a little girl after all. He then says, perhaps it is telltale to divulge that for a moment Hook entranced her, and we tell on her only because her slip led to strange results. And then J.M. Barrie actually tells us what would have happened if Wendy Darling had not been polite back to Captain Hook. He says, had she haughtily unhanded him, and we should have loved to have righted of her, she would have been hurled through the air like the others, and then Hook would probably not have been present at the tying of the children. And had he not been at the tying, he would not have discovered Slightly's secret. And without the secret, he could not presently have made his foul attempt on Peter's life. Now, really, when talking about this moment, we could take the ripple effect all the way back to Slightly, and Slightly's decision that happened much earlier on in the story. However, we did not know about this. So Slightly's decision, which I will talk about in a moment, which ultimately caused the ending effects of this, technically does count as the first ripple, but because we as a reader do not know about it until Wendy's slip in this chapter, I'm counting Wendy's slip as the first of the ripple effects. So we've had the moment then. Wendy has been polite back to Captain Hook, which means that he has stayed at the home under the ground and he has escorted Wendy to where the children are being tied up. This means that he is now present, and we are about to have the next ripple effect. So the pirates have got several lengths of rope which are all the same size, and they are using these to bind the children. However, Captain Hook notices that they are struggling to bind Slightly, and given that the ropes are all the same size, Hook very quickly pieces it together that Slightly is larger than the other boys. At this point, we discover that Slightly had been secretly hollowing out the inside of his tree, because when he was hot, he would drink so much water that he had started to swell. Potentially this is a hint that Slightly was growing up a little faster than the other boys as well, but it doesn't get talked about in the lore, so I'm going to go with the swelling for the drinking of water for now. Now, Captain Hook, noticing this, realizes, and so does Slightly, that because Slightly is bigger, Captain Hook can fit down Slightly's tree. And this is a huge butterfly effect moment, which leads us on to the next ripple. The next ripple being that Captain Hook does manage to fit down Slightly's tree. He worms his way down and gets into the home under the ground. And there he manages to put poison into Peter's medicine cup. And this actually has another consequence that even Captain Hook could not have foreseen. It means that Tinkerbell the fairy nearly dies. Tinkerbell works out what has happened and manages to dive in front of Peter's lips and drink the medicine before he can, meaning that she is now poisoned and dying in his stead. But don't worry, this has a happy ending as well, because Peter Pan, of course, gets all the children who are dreaming of the Neverland to clap their hands, believing in fairies, and this revives Tinkerbell. And Peter goes after the pirates, and the ending of the story happens. But it's very interesting, isn't it, that what started technically with Slightly drinking too much water and hollowing out his tree, and Wendy Darling behaving politely to Captain Hook, ended in Tinkerbell the fairy nearly meeting her demise. Number 8. This one is a little one, or at least it starts little. And this is Peter's decision to start imitating the tick of the crocodile. So Peter is stealthily making his way through the woods, going to the Jolly Roger to rescue his lost boys, Wendy, John and Michael. And on the way there, he passes the crocodile. And he realizes that she is no longer ticking. And he calculates correctly that the clock must have finally run down. And he decides, aha, I can tick. And then I will be allowed to pass by all the other creatures on the island, and none of them will come at me while I'm attempting to make my way as fast as possible to the pirate ship. It's a very good decision, and it works. Peter ticks, nothing gets in his way, and he makes it straight for the pirate ship. However, the next ripple effect of this, that Peter did not intend at all, is that the crocodile hears this ticking and starts to follow him. We're not sure whether she follows because she's confused, thinking someone else has started ticking, or whether she's so used to the tick herself that she follows it almost like a friend. But nonetheless, Peter inadvertently leads the crocodile to the pirate ship, the Jolly Roger. We'll come back to the crocodile herself in a moment, but the next ripple effect for Peter is that when he reaches the ship, he has forgotten completely that he is still ticking and continues to do it. So when he scales the side of the ship expecting a fight, instead he finds the pirates all crowded together and a cowering Captain Hook, none of them looking at him, meaning that Peter is able to sneak into the pirate's cabin, only having to kill one pirate who witnessed him do it, and is there waiting to free the lost boys, all in the greatest of ease, because he happened to choose to tick. Back to the crocodile then, for this final ripple effect in the butterfly moment of Peter choosing to tick. So the crocodile has pursued Peter to the pirate ship, the Jolly Roger, and this means that when Captain Hook casts himself into the sea, she is there waiting, I was about to say with open arms, with open jaws, and she can eat him, and he meets his end. So a sad consequence for Captain Hook, but a great consequence for the hungry crocodile. Number 9. And this one I have already touched on before, but I think it's very important to do so again. I have talked about it many times in other videos on my TikTok channel and here on my YouTube page as well. And we're going back to that moment where Captain Hook chose to unfairly attack Tiger Lily and her people. So I'm coming out of chronological order just for a second to talk about this one. So Captain Hook decides to go completely against the rules of play on the Neverland, and he and his pirates attack Tiger Lily and her people in an ambush. In the chapter, The Children Are Carried Off, J.M. Barrie describes that in the unwritten laws on the Neverland, it is always Tiger Lily and her people who attack first. They do this just before dawn, and it's well known on the Neverland that this is how things happen. Captain Hook, knowing this is a rule of play, knowing this is how it works on the Neverland, chose to go against this. And that is the huge big ripple effect which ultimately ends in his death. J.M. Barrie describes, the pirate attack had been a complete surprise, sure proof that the unscrupulous Hook had conducted it improperly. He also describes that the usual procedure was so well known to Hook that in disregarding it, he cannot be excused on the plea of ignorance. Then when the attack was launched, J.M. Barrie says, it is no part of ours to describe what was a massacre rather than a fight. The last thing J.M. Barrie says about Hook's decision is that if Captain Hook had waited and done the thing properly, he and his men would probably have been butchered, and in judging him, it is only fair to take this into account. What he should perhaps have done was to acquaint his opponents that he proposed to follow a new method. On the other hand, this, as destroying the element of surprise, would have made his strategy of no avail, so that the whole question is beset with difficulties. One cannot at least withhold a reluctant admiration for the wit that had conceived so bold a scheme, and the fell genius with which it was carried out. So this is a huge, big moment of destiny for Captain Hook. He chose to go against the established rules of order and play. He chose to ambush Tiger Lily and her people, giving himself an unfair advantage. And while he was victorious in that moment, his decision leads to a series of ripple effects, which would lead to his death within about 3 hours. We know that it's around 3 hours because just after Captain Hook has poisoned Peter Pan, we learn that it's about 10 o'clock in the evening. And then later on that evening, when Wendy gets all of the Lost Boys into the pirates' bunks to go to sleep after the big battle on the Jolly Roger, she looks at the time and it says 1:30 in the morning. The first set of ripple effects from Captain Hook's decision we have already discussed. So he sees slightly, he sees that he's bigger than the Lost Boys, he gets into the home under the ground, poisons Peter's medicine, and then Tinkerbell nearly dies. Peter chooses to tick, the crocodile is there on the pirate ship. All of those ripple effect moments happen because of Captain Hook's decision to ambush Tiger Lily and her people, and they are all steps to do with sealing his fate. But the big one, the big upshot of Captain Hook choosing to unfairly attack Tiger Lily and her people is that he dies. Somewhere around 1:30 in the morning, a mere 3 hours after Captain Hook enacted his terrible decision, he finds himself standing on the deck of the Jolly Roger, mid-fight with Peter Pan, and he realizes he's not going to win. Peter, he can barely see the boy because sometimes he appears as a mote of dust. He has bested him over and over again. This boy is showing good form over and over again, and Captain Hook realizes that he just cannot defeat him. The crocodile is nearby, it's described as fate, and Captain Hook flings himself off the side of the Jolly Roger, and the last thing he says is Floriet Etona, which is Eton School's motto, the school that had taught him so much and given him so much of his character and personality. And within about 3 hours of making his fated decision, Captain Hook is no more. Number 10. The last one I'm going to talk about is a slightly more cheerful one, just to end the video on a happy note. At the end of the story, when Wendy, John and Michael and all of the Lost Boys have returned home to London and decided to grow up, Mrs. Darling offers Peter a deal. She says that Wendy can go with Peter once a year for a week in the springtime, and she can go to the Neverland and then come back. And Peter accepts this deal, and he flies away. The next year, he comes for Wendy. In the springtime, he takes her away. She goes for a week. She comes back. He does forget her the following year. Never realizing he's missed a year, he comes back the following year. So in the third year, he comes back, takes Wendy away, and then that's the last time he sees her for a long time. However, Mrs. Darling's decision to sweetly offer Peter this deal actually has much more long-lasting consequences than even she could possibly have realized. And it means that for generations, her family members will be visited by Peter Pan and taken to the Neverland. We see this begin when Peter returns when Wendy is a grown-up with her own daughter called Jane, and Peter takes her away to the Neverland and brings her back. And then Jane grows up and has a daughter called Margaret, who is also visited by Peter Pan, who gets taken to the Neverland and comes back. And so it will go on. And that is the last line of the story. In the chapter When Wendy Grew Up, when Margaret grows up, she will have a daughter who is to be Peter's mother in turn, and so it will go on, so long as children are gay and innocent and heartless. This is even the last line of the play as well. If you're watching the version which has When Wendy Grew Up as an extra scene, then the grown-up Wendy says, "Don't be anxious, Nana. This is how I planned it if he ever came back. Every spring cleaning, except when he forgets, I'll let Jane fly away with him to the darling Neverland. And when she grows up, I hope she will have a little daughter who will fly away with him in turn. And in this way, may I go on forever and ever, dear Nana, so long as children are young and innocent." If you're watching the version of the play which doesn't have the afterthought of When Wendy Grew Up, although most versions do have it now, the story finishes with Wendy talking about, if another little girl, if one younger than I am, she can't go on. Oh, Peter, how I wish I could take you up and squadge you. And he draws back. She says, yes, I know. And then she gets astride her broomstick because she's too old to fly now. And she says, home, and is carried away from Peter. So even then, she's still talking about other little girls and how she knows that she is growing up and won't be able to come back and play as Peter's mother forever. And so we see Mrs. Darling's decision and sweet offer to let Wendy keep returning to the Neverland with Peter has effects, going on and on and on. And that wraps it up for the top 10 moments that I consider to be moments of destiny, moments of the butterfly effect, of causing ripple effects through the story of Peter Pan. Now, there are many other ones throughout the course of the story, and in The Little White Bird as well, but these are the 10 biggest ones that I really wanted to talk about for this video. And I hope that it fits the theme of destiny, the theme that you guys chose. I am going to have to think of something else to do for next week on the theme of destiny. I'll work on that for you guys. In the meantime, let me know what you thought down in the comments below, what you thought of some of these moments and the effects that they had. Also, tell me some of your favorite sort of butterfly effect moments from your own stories that you love. Maybe a video game, maybe Until Dawn. Hey, maybe that one on the ship, that one was kind of freaky. Other games that you've played, stories, films, movies, that kind of thing, or D&D games, I guess. Let me know down in the comments below. All right, enjoy your day, my wonderful jelly spoons. Goodbye. Also, I am going to be finishing reading my Lucian fic, and most importantly, I am going to be reading chapters 2 and 3 of the Peter Pan novel and posting them to my YouTube channel as well. I promise, I'm really sorry. I am busy. But I have finished making my Matthew Bourne fairy cosplay now, so I've got a little bit more time. Alright, bye my wonderful jelly spoons. Goodbye.